Hey, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic Thursday. Uh, Today, we're doing something a little different. We're actually in the Pratt schoolroom. We have 3 or 4 kids doing schoolwork here behind us, and a dog that's in front of us, the dog that is extremely loud snoring behind me. Yeah. So, hey, let's talk today about something we all face, and that is motivating our students. We have 9 children. Every one of them is completely different, as they should be, because they are individuals. And we've faced different challenges with each of them. So we want to talk a little bit about 3 this time, and then hopefully next time I can bring you back to do a discussion on 3 more personalities.
Or you can show up.
I just show up.
Because you're not really bringing me back.
2 seconds.
This is where I live.
2 seconds ago, she said, "What are we talking about?" So we'll see how she does.
This is kind of on the fly.
Yeah, but she's probably the best person for me to have this discussion with because of the challenges we've had. Before we begin, though, let me say something. Something that's really important is that we realize that our children's unique personality styles are not a bad thing, that they're not something to be grieved or survived, that we need to have a thankfulness for the personalities and the uniqueness that God created our children with, even when it reminds us of our spouse sometimes, and that we need to be thankful for that. Studies have shown that people who have stress in their lives live longer, are healthier, and have more productive lives. But there's one caveat to that. The people who have stress and believe that stress is good, those are the people who live longer, are healthier, and have more productive lives. I say that because sometimes our children are stressors, and when we have the attitude that our children cause us pain and suffering.
I'm just laughing. You think our children cause us pain and suffering?
When we have that attitude.
And they remind you of me?
No, I know that there are parts of my children that remind her of me.
That's what you were saying.
Those are the annoying spots sometimes, the friction points. It's like, okay. That's another day.
Okay.
That's another conversation.
So, you asked me. I'm just sitting here chuckling. That's all.
So children are a blessing, and our individual children are absolutely each unique, created unique, present challenges and opportunities. And I would encourage you, rather than to see that as an annoyance or a challenge to be overcome, to look at that as a blessing that our children have the strengths and the character. And it's our job to bring out the best in them and to teach them how to self-regulate, self-control areas that perhaps need to be refined. We all have that, even as adults. So before we talk about the personality types and we talk a little bit about our story in stories, I would like to say that we appreciate each of our children's uniqueness, challenges, and opportunities.
Yeah, and I would like to add a little something to that as a reminder. Sometimes in life, we try to recreate the good things that we had in our childhood, and we try to eliminate the bad things. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing. But we have to keep in mind that God has unique purposes and plans for each of our children. And so he had a different plan for me than what he has for each of my children. And even among each of my children, he has a unique plan for each of them. Mm-hmm. And our oldest batch they're completely different than our younger group, just as a whole. Individually, they're all different from each other. They're all over the place. Yeah. But as a whole, our older group of kids really had a different childhood than what our younger group of kids has.
They had different parents, too.
They kind of did, yeah. And so what I like to keep in mind, because sometimes I'm a very ordered, I can be a little bit on the perfectionist side. It's what allows me to do language arts curriculum and keep all the nouns, verbs, what I've covered and all that sort of thing organized and putting that together.
Right.
But the flip side of that is I can get a little too regimented and get a little too locked in. And so I personally can struggle with, well, okay, my older kids grew up knowing and loving the Lord, and they're doing well in life. So I needed, what did I get right in that I need to duplicate with this younger?
Right.
And everything is different, and I can't duplicate the curriculum. I can't duplicate our life, nor would I want to. But you're kind of stuck in this thing of trying to grab a hold of what worked and the processes.
Yes.
And that's exactly what the Bible teaches against. God says that his mercies are new every morning. That means we need something fresh and new every single morning. And it also means that what worked yesterday and the challenges that worked yesterday are probably not what we're going to face today. Mm-hmm. And he wanted his children to always be looking to him for guidance and direction. And what worked yesterday didn't work. Like when they woke up and there was manna, that was a whole different season. And then they woke up one day and there wasn't manna. Mm-hmm. And, that ended up bad because they weren't trusting the Lord each day. Even in the mundane, they weren't trusting him. They weren't following him. They weren't looking to him. They weren't getting to know him. They weren't seeking him. And so what I would challenge us as parents is to realize that his plans and his purposes are unique and different. And we need to seek him for wisdom and guidance on a regular basis within the context of where we are today instead of what worked yesterday. Now, there are absolutely principles that we need to be following and biblical principles to guide our lives. Mm-hmm. But we cannot be trying to recreate something that worked well either in our own life or like our older children or somebody else's, right? So you can look at how we homeschool and the things that we talk about that works within our family. And you can get great ideas, but you have to be really careful that you're not trying to duplicate or elevate even what we're doing above God's purposes and plans for your children.
Throughout life in our ministry, our motto is Holy Spirit trumps everything we ever say. And so as we speak and give a little bit of our story, we ask that you discern what is right for your family, that you make it right for your family. And Scripture says if we ask for wisdom, that he will give us wisdom. So if you're struggling with maybe one of your personality types of your child, and you haven't asked the Lord to give you wisdom to raise that child, I think you're right. It's a constant dependency. We serve a living God.
Yes.
It's a fresh relationship. So to be able to ask to him today and say, my kid is changing. The hormones that worked yesterday have all gone out of whack. How do I disciple this child, raise your child today?
And it's different seasons. In the years that I was having babies, our school day looked a lot different than what it looks like now. And so, I can't recreate that for for this younger set of children, nor do I want to at this point in my life. That would be really exhausting. I love babies, and we've had lots, and we're blessed, but that's not the season that we're in right now. And so we like to follow forms, or at least I like to follow forms and processes. I like to have my I's dotted, my T's crossed. And in some ways, when we lived in New York, the subjects that I had to teach were dictated by the state. Mm-hmm. And now that we live here in Arkansas, that's not so much the case. And I'm getting even more freedom in that, and I'm enjoying that. And I'm really getting to, we have more time now to dive into some things that our kids really enjoy.
Mhm.
And I think we need to do that as much as possible. Looking at them as unique individuals, seeing what might God, seeking God, what might He have for them, and pursuing those things. I wish one of the things that I couldn't do in New York that I wish I could have was spending more time pursuing some of those things. But even in that, I have to recognize God had a purpose and a plan for that season in life, that because of I mean, New York's list of requirements is like this, and it's ridiculous. Yeah. And so we had to cover those things in order to follow the law, mm-hmm. which is important. You need to follow the law. If you don't like the law, work to change it. And so we were never able to get those laws changed in New York, so I had to work within those parameters, and it didn't give me a lot of space for my older group. But I'm not going to continue to follow New York State's plan now that we're in Arkansas just because our kids turned out right. good. So he has a different plan, a different purpose, and each of the kids that we're currently homeschooling, God is shaping through the life. Like he wasn't disturbed that we were living in New York in that season and not in Arkansas mm-hmm. and fretting, oh no. He was using those circumstances to shape and to mold.
Yes. I think as parents, sometimes it's easy to get stuck in ruts, even in relationships. And sometimes it's good to just every day or purposely, periodically stop and mm-hmm. ask yourself, what's working, what's not working? Do we need resets? How do we move forward? And staying healthy with, it's like, as long as we're breathing, we have to breathe accordingly.
One really practical way that you can take those moments, it's kind of hard sometimes in the fray of things to stop, at least it is for me. I juggle a lot of plates, and it can be difficult to take regular moments to analyze everything. But one thing that I will say New York State laws did for me is they established a pattern. We had to send in paperwork every single quarter to the state. I don't have to do that anymore. However, I still try, although we're sadly behind on that, which...
Not too bad.
I took it all downstairs for you to remind you.
My score file.
Yeah.
You said you were going to go through it, so I was like,
yeah, and then I decided not to, just give you the whole pile for you to sort through. So what we do it used to be I just did everything because I had to send in the reports to the state. And so I kind of knew what I needed, and it needed to be in a certain way. But now I don't have those confines. I'm not restricted to what the state. So I've been able to develop my own system since I don't have to send anything into Arkansas on a quarterly basis. Mm-hmm. However, it established that pattern. And so what we do is each quarter, he goes through all of the bigger tests, and he does grading. He goes through this kid's school. We check in on all the kids, make sure, because they're old enough now to be mostly independent. And so we are able to just kind of check in, make sure that handwriting's not right. to the point we can't read it, that they're where they're supposed to be, that they're doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. And it's at that point that I'm able to take a pause.
So
Good morning, Joy.
The dogs of Master Bucks have just entered the room. We have an American bulldog that weighs about 90 pounds that has just been let loose in the house and came to say good morning to everybody.
A little bit of a distraction.
That happens. The moderators have had their dogs coming in.
Yes.
And,
yes.
Thankfully, she didn't rip down the camera and everything else.
We have our old Ishan. She's
exited the room.
She's 13, almost 14. She's left now.
Yeah.
She was snoring behind us. Yes, dogs are a distraction. Dogs are a distraction during the school day too. So going through and doing a quarterly assessment. Now that doesn't mean that if your children aren't taking tests and quizzes, you still can take that moment. For us, that's when we score all that stuff it should be scored weekly, but we don't. So I don't recommend that you wait quarterly to score quizzes and tests. You should be doing that on a weekly basis. However, life is what it is here.
I would love feedback from my boss daily, quarterly, weekly. Sometimes it's yearly. Now we don't score yearly, but sometimes we don't always know our feedback immediately. So,
but it is helpful for the learning process.
Part of real world life.
Yeah, this is real world.
Okay.
So, but the point being is that taking time quarterly to just stop, look at what the kids are doing, not on a surface level that tends to happen on a weekly basis, but on a deeper level, letting dad become a little bit more aware, becoming involved. And it's a good time to sit back and just evaluate what's working, what's not working, what are the stresses that are going on in the home as a whole, in the schoolroom, and each individual child, and how do we make adjustments and fine-tune things, or having restarts. This year when I did the evaluation, showed my schoolroom, I had pointed to one particular desk and said, this child tends to struggle keeping things neat. Well, we've had a total flip around. That child is actually keeping his stuff really neat. And he's raising his hand. No, you don't get to talk. And one of my other students that never struggled so much with that has completely fallen apart in that area. And so, sometimes we get surprised. What wasn't an issue last year is an issue this year, or vice versa. And so, that quarterly pause is a really good time to evaluate those things and to seek the Lord, ask for wisdom in the areas that you find yourself unsure of how to.
Yes. Well, let's jump into the three personality types we're going to talk about today: the strong-willed child, the lazy child, and the perfectionist. So we'll start with the strong-willed child. We
started with the strong-willed child.
Our oldest was very strong-willed.
Oh my goodness, she was very
she started off in a private school that I was a principal of. We pulled her and started homeschooling her, and she was just all out. We have videos of her just, yes. I want to do what I want to do, and that was her motto. And we worked really hard with her to help control that. I mean, today she is an amazing young woman.
Yes, she wrote our phonics and foundations phonics, and she's working right now to write science for the younger grades.
Right, and she has two boys, and has been she's phenomenal with customer service, which is a very controlled environment. When you have people kind of unhappy and everything, she really excels in that. And so early on, I used to draw this picture. I would take a stick of dynamite. This is for your husbands to do. And my drawing isn't that good, but essentially I would draw a stick of dynamite with a fuse. And I would say, the fuse has been lit today. Mom is the stick of dynamite right now, and you continue to blow on this thing, trying to accelerate the wick. You need to work to do everything in your power to shut that thing down before this goes boom.
But it wasn't always just Mom she was blowing the fuse on.
She was, yeah. So this stick of dynamite is a big part of parenting. That child was very much about, listen.
I would say on the flip side, though, something that we failed to do is to really help her. She learned how to control the explosive stuff that she would
create.
Yes, the slamming of doors, the things like that. But we could have done a much better job in helping her work through her emotions better.
Yeah, we focused heavily on teaching her to control her strengths
Right.
And I've told that a lot in the past about Niagara Falls and being able to control the strength. Actually,
Right.
being able to deal with the emotion is something I agree that we didn't have as much understanding as we do today to do that.
Right.
When it came to the schooling aspect, so this is the story with this child. And in all reality, when I say to appreciate the blessing of your children's personalities, I don't think we would be where we are today if it hadn't been for her personality.
Yeah, it greatly, I mean, it pushed us to things that we would not have done, that places we would not have gone. Some days I didn't know if I was going to survive her. Love her passionately, always did. It wasn't about love. It was the stress that it brought to the household. See, Carrie was...
You aren't supposed to tell their names.
Well, we already talked about who, but it's our oldest,
Okay.
so I mean, that's
Okay.
pretty well. God created her to be a very strong person, and he created her to be that way for a purpose and a plan.
Right.
And our job as parents is not to thwart those purposes and plans, but it can be really mind-boggling at times. You know, we needed a lot of wisdom to parent her, and we needed to trust the Lord with the process, probably more than what we did.
Yeah.
Because some of those days were tough when she is, 3 and screaming at the top of her lungs that she wants to do what she wants to do. In that moment, you're having a hard time seeing God's purposes and plans being worked out. You're changing diapers and trying to homeschool kids, and you're trying to juggle a lot of things with a child in a meltdown, and
yeah,
it can be hard to see the bigger picture in those moments.
So this child, I used to fly quite a bit, and I was in the air back in the days with a pager. My pager went off, so as soon as I got to the into the airport, I called home to see what was going on, and Kristen informed me that she had just expelled my daughter from homeschool, and she didn't know how I was going to homeschool her, but she was no longer part of her homeschool. And those moments that you find yourself locked in the closet or locked in the bedroom and everything's not working out the way it should.
Well, one of the issues that we dealt with was that she had two younger brothers that I was homeschooling as well. And she consumed so much of my time and my energy. There was nothing for them. I mean, they ended up not getting the education they should have because she was consuming so much. And I was at the point that nothing was working. Right. And I was done, and I felt they needed a mom too. And right. They needed a teacher. They needed more than what they were getting. Yeah,
it wasn't just an emotional reaction. I mean, it was fully, we had to do a reset as a family. And she was really good at just, no matter what it was, right? If it was 2 + 2 = 4, and she had written 2 + 2 = 25, and you were correcting that correction point would become a battleground.
Yeah, it wasn't a matter of how you said it, what you did.
No, it was just anything could come, the potential.
Right.
So I think in some ways, what you see with Master Book's curriculum, there's some components of that actually flow into that. The daily schedule was really important. This is the kind of kid that if we were going to leave for somewhere, we would want to give her 10 minutes to kind of adjust to it. So we would say, hey, Kara, we're leaving in 10 minutes. And then we just kind of let her go and work through that. So when we said, okay, it's time to go, there were no surprises, and she was kind of on board. So the daily schedule was really important for her. Mm-hmm. Independent work. She's very independent. She required that independence. And so being able to go, read the book, answer the questions worked. Now, one of the reasons that we stopped scoring as much was I wasn't going to fight her for every question. I was going to say, you're responsible for learning, and you're responsible to study for the test. You're smart enough to do this. So you do that, and I'm going to score the test. And if your grade is good, perfect. If it's not, then you're going to do it over again. And the 1 year I actually let her go a long ways and flunked her and had her repeat the grade more to teach her to invest herself. And so it was a painful thing. We
Right.
missed some things that she would have loved to have done because of that season. She had to catch up her schoolwork, but that was
Yeah.
part of the training for her. I'm not the bad guy. It was, your schoolwork is your responsibility. You need to do your responsibility. You certainly have the strength and stamina to do it.
And to explain too, our children score their own work. They correct their own work. They're normal every day, not their quizzes and tests and those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's, to us, it's part of that learning curve, that they're the learning.
Right.
So they score, and if they choose to cheat, then they do it at their own harm, because when they take the test, they won't know the material, and if they fail the test. And it's been painful. You know, some of them have tested the boundary and had to repeat a subject or two, and we knew that that was happening. So it wasn't like, it was more than them just learning. It was developing a character in them as well, that they could understand, I'm going to get out of life what I put into it. And if I cheat and I cut corners and all of that, I'm going to end up
paying the price. And
So,
it puts the ownership of their education in their lap. It's their responsibility. So if they need help in something, it's not my responsibility to notice they're struggling. It's their responsibility to come and get the help that they need.
right.
And
So,
I'm always available. I mean, there are times where I have to tell them, you need to go reread the directions, because it can also come where they just rely on me to solve their problems. Because we have that system that it's their responsibility to come to me, they have that, open invitation, so to speak,
right.
to get help. But they're also kids, and so they can try to take advantage of that, in that becoming my responsibility. But with a strong-willed child, they actually need to own their education more so. That's more an issue for them. They need to own it. When Carrie went off to college, she did phenomenal. She was
on the dean's list, for crying out loud.
Yeah, and her writing, I could never critique. I could never give her, how to improve it, no matter how nicely I phrased it, no matter what. I just stopped. I would just read it and say, yep, that's good. And I didn't do anything because it created such a battle.
Right.
And then she goes off and she writes fantastic. And she does phenomenal in college, but that's because she owned it.
Right.
It was her choice to go. It was her choice to do it. And so she owned it. And so for that strong-willed child, allowing them, and again, this is under the understanding that you've sought the Lord, that He's directed your steps, but as much as possible, allowing that child to choose what they're doing, what they're studying, what curriculum they're using, what subjects. So how I would play that out, it's not how it ended up playing out with Carrie, but again, God's purposes and plans were at work, and we're different people than we are now. If I had a strong-willed child now, I would do what I tend to do anyway. I'm not going to give them a CBD catalog and say, here, pick out what you're doing. I mean, I still have things that God has put us in charge to bring them up. They're not raising themselves. But I will hand them, say, the Master Books catalog, and I will say, what subjects do you want? Or I'll give them maybe 2 or 3 choices. This year you can do this or you can do that. Now, I do have a plan for my kids as to what I want them to cover each year. So I have like a 4-year plan for each one of them. However, when it comes time to decide, I bring them in on the decision as much as possible. But that's even more crucial with a strong-willed child who requires that ownership. For Carrie, that was the mantra she carried. I want to do what I want to do. Now, obviously, that has some refining that needs to be done, because we can't do what we want to do, and we can't carry rebellion, and we have to learn how to follow the Lord's leading and the Lord's plan, and we have to guide that student. However, they do need that say, that ownership, that direction, that autonomy, to work through the struggle, to work to get out themselves. And that's okay to let them do that.
So I think sometimes too, like with her, it was important to have empathy, because both of us are extremely strong-willed. Mm-hmm. And if you want to motivate us, allow us to feel like we're guiding our own ship, and just give us some practical coaching. If you try to tell us you're going to do this on this day at this time, I would shut down more than she did. Mm-hmm. So part of it was giving her some ownership, allowing her the struggle. Vicki asks, what if they won't admit they're having trouble? Sometimes let them struggle through that. That's part of that is this kid almost needs the struggle to excel. And not always, but I mean, there's a component here where just give them the tools, let them know you're there, but this is what you got to accomplish, right? You're going to climb this mountain. If you gotta hire a goat to get up there, you're going to climb this mountain. And I'm here to help you if you need it. You figure it out, and let them use that energy to accomplish that.
Give them the tools. You have to give them the tools.
Right.
So what we ended up doing with our daughter is he got her a computerized, it graded everything through the computer. It was not the ideal. It's not what I would have chosen. God's hand was in it. And again, if we were to have a strong-willed child again, we wouldn't take that path. But God was leading and directing. And in that situation, it diffused her and gave her the tools. Like, it's all there.
Well, the computer didn't argue with her.
Right.
She could sit there all day mad at the computer, and it had no emotion.
Right.
And that's almost what she needed, because if she saw emotion from us, she would channel everything to that emotion.
Yeah. And so now what I would do is, let's say she had picked the God's design science, and I would get all of the stuff that she needed to perform every experiment. I would make it clear to her, you can pick and choose, but you have to do 5 experiments a year. You can do more than that, but you have to do at least 5. Make things clear what your expectations are. If you're going to pass this course, you have to get at least 80% on the course in order to pass it. Make your expectations very, very clear. Give them the tools, which involves all of whether it's art supplies, whether it's science equipment, whatever it is that they need, and show them where to find it. Whether it's, they need a dictionary, whatever. It takes a little bit of planning at the outset, but then you hand that over and you say, okay, it has to be done by such and such a date. Here's the schedule that you'll be able to get that done by. Mm-hmm. And then they are in charge of making that happen. Right.
Yeah, I would travel. Well, because she was kind of under my watch. So I would travel, and I would tell her, you're to be in your desk at these times. You're to have this accomplished. Mm-hmm. And then when I would come back from a trip, and sometimes it would be a 2 or 3 week period before I'd come back, she would have to have all of those things done. And then I didn't engage her about it. Real careful not to take on, if it was wrong, it's wrong, deal with it, and step away from it, and have that component. We were fortunate that she didn't really struggle too much. Her thing was just more the conflict. It wasn't, right. She wasn't strong-willed and challenging us with
she didn't struggle academically.
Right.
And so
this was just channeling her personality to accomplish more academically, and she did really well that way. So let's talk about then the lazy child, and anybody who has questions or whatnot, feel free to comment. I know a lot of moms have experience as well, and we'll be sure to watch this post. So the lazy child, I think of our third, who was extremely capable of doing the work, but also not very motivated to do the work.
Well, I wouldn't call it him a lazy child. The issue, well, I guess we could come back and say, okay, what we would normally see as a lazy child, you sometimes have to define the whys. And so for him, he was very, very smart, but his interests were hands-on. So he could take a Lego model and build phenomenal. It was just amazing. These huge, it used to be, okay, how are we going to come up with enough money to buy a Lego kit that was challenging to him?
And he'd disappear for days.
Yep.
Until it was done.
And then he'd come out with this huge, crazy big thing. I used to scour eBay for deals to keep him challenged. And again, in New York, this is where, you know, for me, we would have been able to accomplish a lot more with him had I been able to do more hands-on type things. But the Lord knew. He provided an electrician at a certain point in his life in high school that taught him, and we had an old building that we were running our business out of that we were remodeling. Mm-hmm. And so he learned electrical work. And if you watched his grades, his high school grades were not that great. And he didn't score that great on his SATs either. But it's not because he wasn't capable.
Right.
In his life and his juncture right then, he was exploding in learning.
Right. He
was learning how to drywall. He
would tear the engines apart. We'd travel all over the country and buy snowblowers and resell them. And that was what he was doing. And he was making some pretty decent cash doing it. He'd tear them all apart, rebuild them. I mean, the stuff that he was able to do.
Right. And then he had to go and do his desk time and do his geometry.
But when it came time for school, I mean, I used the term loosely for that purpose, but
yeah,
you could have said he was lazy in school.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, he took shortcuts. He never performed at the level I knew he was capable of performing at. And today, as an adult, he's getting all these certifications at various like industrial, electrical, I don't know. It's stuff I don't understand. But he's getting all these certifications in all these different areas. And that was the other thing with him. If you ask him, what do you want to do when you grow up? He's like, I don't know. There's too many things that I love to do. He loved to cook. He loved to work on engines. He loved to do stuff around the house. And he's in a factory setting right now where they will pull him off of one thing and put him into another for a seat time in a season.
He loves it.
And he loves it. And so he becomes a go-to guy for all these different things. And that's, you know, it's really neat to see God's purposes and plans being played out. Yeah, it was frustrating that I would get these half-baked type things from him. But his thing is he just wanted to get through the basics of what he had to do his seat time, so we could check it off New York State's requirement. But the things that he was actually doing when he wasn't doing school was pretty remarkable.
So, but the challenge with this is, like, even I have a dream job and love my job, but there are things that I don't enjoy today that I have to do.
Right.
And so the challenge, school, he was going to do fine working with his hands, and we knew that from an early age.
Right.
But there are components of discipline, of pushing through the hard things, of forcing yourself when they're capable of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, in his case, he was a C student when he should have been an A student.
Right.
And so he still had to complete. He knew he had to be at least a C student in order to pass. And so that's what he rose to. You know, maybe I should have made him be at least a B student in order to pass.
Now, when he was a student, we had 4 children, one very special needs at the time, under the age of 4. So when he was in these at the high school level,
right,
we were buried with business, ministry, and kids. So he was able to kind of press against that a little bit, where I think today we would have been a little bit more focused on the discipline side.
Probably.
Of discipline yourself to accomplish what needs to be done and then go further. So I think sometimes with a lazy kid, they may not be interested. And when they're interested, if you see them all of a sudden it clicks and they lose track of time in that, then you know it's an interest-based issue.
Right.
And then work with them to give them challenges that maybe they don't enjoy, but is necessary for them, because now in his life, he has to do things he doesn't enjoy doing, right?
And he does them.
He does, yeah. Mm-hmm. He finds ways to do them creatively sometimes that fit his style. Right. I think it's a challenge, because as an adult, if you told me I had to learn how to bake cupcakes and decorate them, and you didn't tell me that I was going to get a big reward for that, right? So, but there are people that would love to learn how to cook delicious cupcakes and decorate them. So I think it's hard with our kids, because sometimes we want them to be excited about the things, like I'm excited about the master book science, or I'm excited about writing strands. So I want all my kids to be excited about it too.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, because I loved science. That's the subject that I excelled in. And when I started homeschooling, I was most excited about science. And my older kids, they weren't all that excited about science. And so now I have some younger kids that probably would enjoy some of the experiments. Our youngest really loves that sort of thing. But now it's ingrained in me that that's just a me thing. My kids don't like it. And so I forget, we could actually have fun with this, because I've been trained by my older kids that, no, we don't like to do experiments. We don't like to do that sort of thing. And so I fought with them to do those sorts of things. And I've just given up. And now, so, there are things that sometimes you just have to stop and reset and figure out, what are my kids trying to tell me? So with your lazy student, why, and is it important that are they doing things in other areas of their life that they're loving and that they're excelling at? And if that's the case, then chances are they just have a gifting that the traditional school model is not necessarily meeting.
So when we're talking about this, we're talking about a child, though, and this is very important for us as parents, screen time can definitely harm our children's capabilities.
Yes.
Our brains, the wiring of our brains, the reward system, and all of that can actually be very short-circuited. And even, you really have to even ask yourself, as they become teenagers, and different things, like what are they looking at? What's happening? Because the brain is so affected by the reward centers that if they're on their phones and you don't have something to monitor, or you haven't got a way to shut down the network, then you really have to start. There is a good place. Gaming, social media, texting, any of those type of things that kids tend to be drawn towards, inappropriate websites, things like that can definitely start to short circuit the brain. And I posted a video in one of the groups that we're part of. They found that an hour more of sleep, the creative center of your brain is right here, right? And it helps us accomplish our goals. So they took addicts, recovering drug addicts, and they studied them. If they only had 7 hours of sleep, the chances of them relapsing was significantly higher than if they had 8 hours of sleep. Because at 7 hours of sleep, the goal-keeping side, the intelligent side, like of the brain, basically didn't have enough to function, and so the brain went into a survival mode, and then it just focused on what are the needs I have. And because that was part of the reward center, they actually went for that. Mm-hmm. So sleep, they found out that like certain types of foods and nutrition had a big part in that as well.
I would say stress.
Yep.
What's going on?
Inability to understand stress, like just that anxiety type stress.
Right. Yeah. Well, what's going on in other parts of life?
Right.
And is there something that you've overlooked that's actually contributing to stress?
So aside from personality issue, you have to look at the outside circumstances. Is there anything going on with this kid? They're on the tablet too much. They're playing video games too much. We limited ours because we can definitely see, especially in one of our sons, when he's on too much, he becomes very temperamental, very like his whole personality begins to change.
Right.
So we have what's like 2 days, an hour or something a day.
Yeah, I've been actually restricting it a little bit more lately.
Yeah, we've unplugged a lot.
Yeah.
Just the more we learn about the brain and we learn about how these things are designed with reward centers and stuff, we've definitely been more conscious of the importance of that. So just something with a lazy child, just make sure, we're talking kind of personality, but make sure that their diet, they're getting their sleep, they don't have stimulation outside of good creative play, hands-on, or that type of thing.
And I would also say your expectations, because for some kids, that's just who they are. They're just more even keeled. Mm-hmm. And they're just not going to get all that excited or expressive over what they're doing. And so, make sure that your expectations are in line with who that child actually is. And honestly, if my kids don't all love and get excited about school, that's okay. They just have to do it. It's just something that needs to be done in life. There are times that they really enjoy it, and then there's times that they don't. And we have to give them room to not like that they have to do it.
Right.
And so, our expectations sometimes need to change.
I think too, giving them some input. Like you said, here's 3 different things. What are you interested in? I'm excited that there are so many options in homeschooling.
Right.
That when we attend the booths together, to see parents come up with their kids and say, well, what do you think of this? And giving them that choice. We applaud you parents that do kind of allow them a little bit of freedom to choose, because then that puts the responsibility on them as well.
Right. I think for a child, it would be really stressful to give them too many choices. Like here's, we need to narrow it down, and we need to narrow it, to match our purposes and our goals, but whenever possible, giving them that choice. Now, that doesn't mean my kids get to choose all the curriculum that they're doing.
Right.
Sometimes they don't get to choose. But as often as I'm able to allow them to choose, I try to do that. And so that's going to help them buy into it. That's going to help them invest themselves a little bit more into it.
Yep.
But, like I said, sometimes they're just not going to be thrilled, and they have to learn to do it. I think as a mom, when my kids are loving what we're doing, it validates me. And so we have to be careful that we're not seeking to validate what we're doing.
Keeps the thing the thing.
Right. We're not looking to our children to validate us. We're looking to the Lord, and we're looking to furthering the Lord's purposes and plans for that particular child. Now, we also have to understand that his purposes and plans are different for each child within a family. And so sometimes it's just trusting the process.
Right. So we've gone really long. and we have to talk about perfectionist.
The perfectionist is harder.
I've had to work with one of my perfectionist children, and I really enjoy it because where I'm not a perfectionist, she's like you and keeps
Right.
me on. Something I've noticed that works well for her sometimes is when I say I have a deadline, and that forces her to not have a lot of options, so she tends to be more direct. The second thing that I've done with her a lot recently is teach her it's okay to tell people I need to step back and think through things, because she goes almost a little bit loopy thinking of all the options. She's going to give the wrong answer and everything. And so to say, pause and tell people I need a break. I need to step back and just let me think about this, and then I'll call you right back. And I think in some ways with the school, instead of just learning, she was so focused on, were we going to be happy with the outcome?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that I've had with my more perfectionist students is if they don't struggle in school, I can load them up with too much, and they take longer to get through their work because it's important that their answers are precise. It's important that their handwriting is perfect. It's important that, every problem is correct the first time that they do it. And so that all takes a lot of time. And so if you load them up with too many subjects, you're just going to bury them. And so that's something that I have to really be careful of. But at the same time, you can assume that you have to pull back when that's not the problem.
Right.
And so if a student is still struggling to get through their schoolwork in a day, for the perfectionist, and you realize it is a reasonable amount of material, they should be able to get through it, then you've got to uncover exactly what's going on and what the reason is that it's taking so long. And you have to teach them ways, like you said, giving those tools in order to focus on what's actually important.
I think too, the culture is important. So one of our biggest perfectionists was number 4. Her brothers were relentless that if she made a mistake, to humiliate her. And so she's always careful of, how's this going to impact who's going to come in. I think we almost need to create a culture that part of learning is mistakes. When I learn to walk, I fall 4 times for every step that I take. And that's how we learn to walk. Learning is trial and error. It's not all we study, we get it. For those of you who do that, I applaud you. But for those of us who learn more through trial than we do, or through error than we do through actual, I learn a lot of things in my life through the errors, and that has helped me to continue to grow. We almost needed to let the perfectionists know that if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. Mistakes is part of perfection, is part of growth.
Right. And there are some ways that you can lead a perfectionist child, help them to develop that. Our youngest is also a perfectionist, which is kind of interesting. In the whole dynamics of family, the youngest generally isn't considered the perfectionist, but in our case, he is. It's who God made him to be. And when he first started with his schooling, he wouldn't color because he couldn't do it perfect. He didn't have the hand-eye coordination to color perfectly. And so he just didn't want to do it. If he couldn't do it perfect, then he didn't want to do it. And so what I ended up doing is finding some books that, like, say there was a picture of an apple to color. It had one little circle in the middle that was white that they would color in red. And so looking for tools like that, obviously not every kid is going to struggle with coloring, but ours did. And so that actually got him coloring, which helped him improve his skill. And then at a point he was ready to color, whether he made mistakes or not, then we resumed to normal coloring. pages. We went back to normal pages. But for that little period of time, that helped him overcome that perfectionist tendency. And so there are some practical things, talking about it, walking through it, because our children correct their own work. My perfectionist children come to me, Mom, is this answer right? What they wrote was spot on, but it didn't exactly match with the answer key. And they're concerned with not cheating. They want it to be right. Mm-hmm. And so teaching them the gray areas are okay in certain places. Not everywhere in life are gray areas okay. But teaching them how to define those gray areas. That's really hard with the perfectionist child. They don't just come by those things naturally.
So I'm not a perfectionist, right?
Yeah, right.
So something though I've noticed that was sad for me was, okay, so ours was in a culture where we grew up, that child was safe and had a lot of affirmation in that. We moved to the Wild West, and what people's opinions were definitely affected her self-esteem and her identity. And is it important that a parent is also training that perfectionist that your identity isn't in the opinion of others? Your identity is in accomplishing the goals that God has given to you.
Yes.
And that becomes part of your discipling as well, because I've seen it almost was a setback coming, when we moved here, because suddenly somebody would say, oh, you have red hair, and then she became so self-conscious about it, where she was praised for it in a safe culture. And I think about that with school. She's afraid to step out and even go, like, she's so capable, but sometimes I've really had to push hard because of that.
But again, you have to trust the process. And so being there as the backup to say, hey, wait a minute.
Right.
That's part of the parenting process. It's part of the launching process even.
Yeah.
To having those conversations. And so we don't live in a vacuum. When we first started homeschooling or parenting in general, my thought was, because I'm a perfectionist, that I somehow, it's laughable now, but back then in the mindset and life, I thought I could create somehow this perfect environment and it would spare my children. They wouldn't argue, they wouldn't fight, they wouldn't, if they just had this perfect little thing.
They'd never have any struggle in their marriages. They'd never have to deal with
exactly. And so I worked really hard to create this perfect environment. And my oldest, of course, blew that theory out of the water. And then, like you said, my two boys had this little sister come along. They adored her, but they also delighted in tormenting her. And it's not like we just allowed it to happen and said, whatever, boys, do what you want to do to her, They were brutal, and we did everything we could to stop that. And the sad reality is we live in a fallen, sinful world, and these sweet little children that we give birth to, we somehow, at least I somehow, had this perfectionist mindset that I could somehow have this perfect, God himself gave Adam and Eve the perfect environment, and they blew it. But yet somehow I think that I can set all this up for perfection. And so I think the thing to keep in mind is it's not about creating perfect little creatures. It's about teaching them what to do when life isn't so perfect, when the people around you are sinful and hurt you, or say things that don't edify you and put out the red carpet to you, and you have to deal with that stuff.
Yeah.
And so in that situation, I'm glad some of that came out and we were able to encourage that child to say, no, I can't go based on what everybody else.
Right. I think realistic expectations is something that's hard for us as parents. We are going to have strong-willed children. We are raising little sinners just like us. We do live in a fallen and sinful world, and it is impossible, because it's not a vacuum, to keep them from also experiencing the consequences and the effects of sin, as hard as that is. Yeah. I think it's almost like in the types and shadow of nature, where you have the bird in the nest and the mom feeds and prepares and strengthens the bird. It's unrealistic to think that the first time that bird jumps from the nest that they're going to have perfect flight and not hit the ground. It's almost better to have some expectation that I'm preparing this bird to hit the ground and then pick themselves up and start flying. Because that's what we've seen more and more as we've released our kids. Sometimes it's harder with your adult kids than it is with your younger kids because of that. And so their strength as children help them endure the things that the Lord has called them to and is preparing them for. Their interests is also preparing them for what God is doing in their lives. And even their desire to please, I think, can give them a heart to please the Lord. Right. So we've gone over an hour, and I've sworn I wouldn't do that again. But we will continue. If you have questions or comments, if we have to, we'll come back on each of these individually. We're going to talk about some other things like special needs children, delayed, where maybe we're a little bit delayed in developing or ready for education, being academically appropriate. Some of the different, the gifted student, dealing with gifted students. So I'm going to continue the discussion with Kristen in the teaching tips as much as I can. Hopefully it's a blessing to everybody to just hear what our feedback is. And we definitely encourage you to seek the counsel and the wisdom of the Lord. If you haven't asked for wisdom today in homeschooling, please do, because he promises he will do that. And I applaud my kids because we've done an hour and they've been very silent. Yeah. So excellent.
They've been sitting here schooling.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining me today. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, guys. Have a good week. May God bless your homeschool.